Okay, here we go. We're in the middle of 9 days, and welcome tonight is number 5, the 5th out of 6, 5 out of 6 lectures. As you can see over there, the name of the lecture series is From Bavel to Barcelona and Fez to Frankfurt, the powers of the Jewish courts throughout the Diaspora. As I said the other day, it's all inspired by Shmuel Tarshish. And tonight's talk is being sponsored, as you can see, by Mr. and Mrs. Chaim Khan, in memory of Mr. Aryan Polsky, Arben W. Yehuda, who I understand is the yard site should be tonight, although if it says the 5th of Av, so when is today the 5th of Av? No, that's what he told me, so I'll take him as his word. We're just starting. Okay, good to see you. I'll start as I always do by thanking the Shul for being the host, and thanking our sponsors over here, and thanking our tech team, and now we'll get down as always to business. Tonight is the 5th of 5 of 6 lectures, and we moved the story forward chronologically to the modern era when the state destroyed the power of the Beis Din. Okay, so everything we did until now, or almost everything, involved the notion of the autonomous coercive communities in which the courts were an arm of the community and could actually punish people physically and otherwise, and then things changed. I was going to, as happened the other day, I had so much material the other night, I said I'll just break it off there and pick up here with what I'm going to be about to begin my remarks, because it fits in very well with the early modern and the modern period. Okay, so as I was going to say, the hour is late, but now the hour is early. Let me turn to one form phenomenon of the early modern era, which was a harbinger of the future. That's the point I wanted to make, and that's your Portuguese Jewish communities, which arose in the 16 and 1700s, and actually, foreshadow what happened to Beis Dins and communities and things like that down till today. Okay? Now, when I say the term the Portuguese community, as you can see on the map over there, let me find my thing here. Okay, great. Thanks to Bill Sachs for this. So this is Europe in the early modern period. Portugal is over here. I'm talking about the Jews who were able to escape the Inquisition. The Jews who were not, forget about it. They were killed. The ones who escaped, and they ran away usually to here, which is Amsterdam, and then Hamburg, and eventually London, and a couple places like that. Some of them hung around here in Bordeaux and San Sebastian and things like that. And a few lucky ones made it to Livorno, where they lived the life of Riley. They got rich. These Jews had a unique characteristic, and that is they were all born Goyim, right? The Portuguese, I think I talked about it last time, the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492, so half the Jews stayed. And as far as we can tell, they honestly converted. You never hear about them Jewishly again. So those Jews who stayed behind in 1492 did not hold a secret Seder or anything like that. However, a small group of them ran away to Portugal in 1492, and they were promised by the King of Portugal that he would leave them alone, but then he didn't in 1497. And they were forcibly converted to Catholicism. As from their ranks, about half of them secretly remained loyal Judaism. So if you want to be very technical, the Portuguese Jews are really Spanish Jews who ran export to Portugal and ended up in that Geschichte. But they called themselves the Portuguese nation, Nación, and they held themselves to be better than the other Jews because they thought this would go over better with the Goyim, and it did. So in other words, the Ashkenazis is the riffraff, you understand? We descend from the more Chasheva types. The entire community, therefore, when they established themselves in different places, such as in Amsterdam and other places in the Netherlands, such as in London and in Hamburg and who knows where else, right? Whenever they settled down, they were all BTs from top to bottom, including the rabbis, with no living experience of Jewish life, and they certainly had no Masorah as far as a Beis Din is concerned. These are people who knew they were Jewish, and all they could do back in the old country in Portugal was at great risk read the Old Testament in Portuguese, or perhaps in Spanish, but they couldn't practice anything, and if they did, it's what they thought Judaism was, and I won't go into all that. But the bottom line is, they didn't have any notions about making a kehillah with a Beis Din, and the Shulchan Aruch, and Choshen Mishpah, all that stuff. How would they? Now, wherever they came, they formed themselves into a community, a nación, a nation as they called it, and that's because they wanted to have their own identity and hopefully political power. Strength lies in numbers. Naturally, people of the same background want to hang around with each other. But it wasn't that they knew the Talmudic passages about the rights of a Kehillah and Shiva Tuvir and all the rest of it. Rather, they ran it in Spanish-Portuguese style, which is there's 5 or 6 or 10 Richie Riches. They're what you call the Mahamad. They had junta, and they're the dictators of that community. As benevolent dictators, they know what's better for everybody else than anyone else. Meaning, we don't want the Dutch to get angry at us. We don't want the French to get angry at us. We don't want the Italians to get angry at us. So everybody toe the line. So their model is very much a top-down authoritarian model. And to use Baltimore language, if we lived in such a community, no one would be allowed, without written permission from the junta, to call a talk show. Right? Because then it'll make a fool for the other Jews, and it'll bring down disrepute on us, and it'll be terrible. So they would actually forbid it, you see? No one can do this, no one's allowed to do that, and so forth. I told you that's why, well, we'll see in a second. So basically, this is the authoritarian structure. That, by the way, is why they excommunicated Spinoza, right? Because they thought he's doing things. Let's go to the next one. Spinoza lived in Amsterdam. His parents were Moranos who ran away from Portugal. And he did things that they thought would make a Chil Hashem for the community and cause the other Jews to look bad, right? It wasn't that they were so super frum, they didn't like what he was saying. They said, the ideas you're saying will go over really poorly with the Goyim. They'll think all the Jews think like you, don't believe in God, not in the traditional sense, and whatever. By the way, it wasn't the Beis Din of the Portuguese community that did it. It was the junta. You understand? It was the guys who were in charge, the board of directors, which have, I would say, near absolute power within the confines of that community. Now, there were 4 areas, as I said before, where the Portuguese Jews set up Kehillas. In Italy and France, in the Protestant countries, which is very significant. Notice in Holland and England, including the U.S., or it was the British colonies, as you know, at that time. So I don't believe you need me to tell you that the first Jews in this country came to New York. No, that's not true. The first Jews came to this country in New Amsterdam in 1654, when New Amsterdam, later called New York, was still a Dutch colony. I think we all learned that when we were kids. Peter Stuyvesant and all that. So, and in Hamburg, which is a Protestant area. Now, there's a significance to this. And finally, there were some Portuguese Jews who settled, very interestingly, in Islamic countries. So in other words, some went to the Ottoman Empire in North Africa. There's even a few Gedolim that come from this kind of background, which is most unusual, because they're the children or grandchildren of these refugees, and they learned up a storm and a half. So they weren't the Portuguese Jews, their children are usually grandchildren, and they just happened to take to learning. The Shar HaMelech, if that means anything to you, the famous pilpalistic commentator in the Rambam, his name is Francisco Núñez Belmonte. He was a Rav with a long beard and payas. And Shmuel Abuhab in Venice, there were such types. Okay, now, I'm interested in this context in the Beis Din questions. In Catholic Italy, in general, the courts, Jewish courts were fairly weak when it came to punishments because the Catholic Church dominated the different Italian states, and it was offensive to the Catholic sensibility that the Jews should still have some kind of a power. The very reason that the Jews liked the idea of having a Beis Din, which has power and can beat up people and things like that, is precisely why the Catholics discountenanced it. You may possibly recall how, what's the right word, disturbed the Catholic Church was when Israel became a state. Right? It took them a long time to swallow that because the Jews are supposed to be in Gullus. The Jews are not supposed to have a kind of a dignity or power or something like that. It really bothered them. Okay? In France, so the point's like this. Were there Beis Dins and things like this in the Italian communities in general, in the Portuguese communities, let's say, for example, in Livorno, where the Portuguese lived well, and Venice? Yeah, they did, but they don't have too much power to punish people because it's a Catholic country. Anything happens, you've got to get it done by the state courts. I think I mentioned many times, the Jews who lived in Venice, the Republic of Venice, Venice was famous for having tough but fair judges. Okay? If you go to the Doge's Palace, and some of us have been in Venice, I think, you'll see, I always remember it, they have a sign in Latin which says that the impartial administration of justice is the foundation of the Venetian Republic. Right? So, therefore, if a Jew in Venice has some issues that has anything with the criminal or anything like that, we're going to take it to Italian court. In France, there were no coercive powers to the Jewish community because they were pretty much sub rosa. the Jews who moved to France were not allowed to be there. The French had kicked out formally the Jews back in the 1300s. So if these Moranos, conversos, ended up in places like Bordeaux, Marseille, and other places like that, first of all, they came in under the guise that they're Catholics. Second of all, they towed the line. They went to church. Secretly, they hung out with each other and things like this. And secretly, they could practice Jewish rituals because in France, there did not exist an inquisition. And if there's not an inquisition, nobody's looking at you. If you're sufficiently discreet, you can get away with it. And because after all, what does the average French guy know that me and him and him and him and her get together on Friday nights? I mean, maybe we're just a social group. You know what I mean? They don't know when the holidays are. But if you lived in Spain and Portugal, they actually have snitch squads all the time. And your servants and others are paid to watch you. And the Inquisition even has records if your great-great-great-great-grandfather was Jewish, so you're still on the blacklist. And it happened more than once in Spain and Portugal. I've told the story many times. A guy's a total guy, meaning he's a Catholic, the son of a Catholic, the grandson of a Catholic, great-grandson of a Catholic. But the Inquisition knows if you go 7 generations back, you're Jewish. Therefore, he's on the list. And this guy happened to be in the month of April, and the Inquisition knows in April is Passover. And he did, and it was bureaucratic. If you do certain things, it indicates you're Jewish. And he said, gee, I think I'm going to go to the store and buy some bitter herbs. No, he had no idea what he's doing. Next thing you know, he's arrested. He said, it's like Kafka. They take him to headquarters Inquisition. They show him the torture instruments. They say, you want to make this quick? You want to make this long? And, he takes a look at all this stuff. He said, to hell with it, burn me now and get it over with. You see? And so, and it's a Kafkaesque because he honestly didn't have any idea of what he did wrong, what was going on. In other words, he was a genuine Gentile. I understand if you go by the genetic, the ancestry, but he's been, and his family's been 200 years, let's say, for example, regular Christians. And now he's getting burned or something like that, garroted. Some of you didn't know it was a crime. So anyway, that's what it was like. The point is that the Jews in France didn't have to suffer that. But if you follow what I'm saying, when they set up their little communities, everything was very quiet, very discreet. As I said before, they are officially Catholics. And as generations went by in France, little by little, the Goyim started to get it, but very slowly. And these Portuguese Jews, the vast majority of them went into business, import-export. Therefore, they were all good for the French economy, which in those days was very mercantilist, and therefore was like freaked out on exports, which makes sense. You export, you help in the economy. And the long and the short of it is, after a while, it's a very interesting story. After a while, even the bigoted French king said, don't ask, don't tell, just leave him alone, just leave him alone. And little by little, they were able to come out of the closet. So by the time you get to the 1700s, they could openly be Jewish. But you can understand that they're very assimilated, very Frenchy, very dressed like Goyen, and all this sort of thing. So my point is, that's not going to have a community with a Beis Din that's going to go and, sanction you or punish you or anything like that. They're beyond. They are Orthodox because there was nothing else. But it's not going to be a very strong pie situation. I can tell you right now, for those who are interested, the French hechshers were like notorious. You see, nobody trusted their wine. Abe should send a special guy down to Bordeaux, to supervise the run and things like that. So I'm trying to say like this. You have, therefore, Jewish communities with synagogues and all the other Jewish rituals and a fairly tight communal organization because of the Adjunta, but the Beth Din is really just a ritualistic kind of thing. It's not really part of Jewish life, and it's certainly not punishing anybody because, one thing they definitely don't want to do is rock the boat. You see, they don't want to rock the boat. And finally, in the Protestant countries, which, again, the way it was set up legally in the Dutch Republic and in England, they were already like normal countries. Nobody has the right to punish anybody except the state. So there's no question about a Jewish court, a Beis Din being set up, armed with these powers or those powers. The idea of a Beth Din is completely divorced from the exercise of power already in the 1600s in England and in Holland. So the most they could do to Spinoza was to say, we excommunicate you, meaning we won't give you an aliyah, we won't bury you or something. That's very far removed from the kind of physical stuff that we saw last time in Spain and all the rest of it, where you're chopping people's heads off and noses and burning and all this other kind of stuff. Okay? Because after all, a normal country, and these were the beginnings of normal countries, England and Holland and the other Protestant countries, a normal country, the government has an exclusive on coercion. I think that's how we like it, right? I mean, the state of Maryland can coerce you. The city of Baltimore can coerce you. The federal government can coerce you. They can even kill you if they pass a law and this and that and the other. The public says the government has the right to use extreme measures, but nobody else. You see? That's why there's all this controversy over guns in the Second Amendment. Because a lot of people say like this, the police should have the guns, right? Versus others who say, no, the American system is different. Constitution guarantees, the right. So, and anyway, identity was always fluid in these Portuguese communities. If I were a Portuguese Jew living in France or Holland, and I did something, a Jewish community said, we're going to get you, I'll just say I'm a Christian. I can always switch. You see? Identity was very fluid. A lot of these guys, let's say, for example, would be living in Amsterdam. However, they did business all over the world. And so sometimes it's very dangerous to go to Portugal, Mamish, but I may go to some other country, and while I'm there, I'll be a Christian. And when I get back home to Amsterdam, I'll put my yarmulke back on. You see? Because he knows how to be a Christian, and all these things happen all the time. He might even have a wife here and a wife there, for all we know. If a victim complained to the authorities, the entire Kehillah would be in trouble. And anyway, as I said before, these communities, which emerged as important communities, certainly wealthy communities, they not having barely made it as Jews in Portugal secretly, not knowing anything about Judaism, they had no tradition of rabbis, Talmud, rabbinic, authority. It was all foreign to them. As far as they know, if they're setting up a new Kehillah, let's say in London, a place like that, you get a rabbi the way a church hires a minister. No, it's an employee. Right? The modern way. It's an employee. And could fire at will. And, if you want to, if a board of directors wishes to, there are such shuls, to hold the rabbi on a very short leash. That was the Portuguese model. So once you do that, you're not talking about a Beis Din that has koyach and things like in the way that we discussed it before. It's a different model. If anything, the challenge for these communities was to devise a kind of coercion or pressure to secure conformity in the absence of physical coercion. And obviously what they could do, and by the way, to do so in an era when religious coercion as such was being challenged and stigmatized in the Western countries. This is the great era, let's go to the next one, of John Locke, right? Who was the first theoretician of being opposed in principle to religious coercion. He's one in favor of religious liberty, correct? What's the idea of religious liberty? God created us in such a way that the mind is, the argument is very simple. Do you see my fingers? Yeah. Do you see my nose? Yeah. Suppose I kick somebody, you can all see it. Now tell me what I'm thinking. Now God created me in such a way that you can see if I punch somebody. You can see if I kick somebody. But God created me and you in such a way you can't tell what I'm thinking. Must be he wanted that to be free. You see, these kind of ideas started popping up, which were very foreign to classic Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Now, therefore, the Kehillah had to learn different model. You had to appeal for conformity, not threaten. Right? In the old model, what we talked about last week and the week before, you're threatening and enforcing for nonconformity. Tonight, we transition to what's called the modern era in Jewish history. What do you mean by the modern era in Jewish history? It's an interesting, what they call periodization question in the historical profession. With the Goyim, modern period in Jewish history is simple. It starts with the French Revolution. That's how they do it. Okay. Now, by the way, nothing's hard and fast, but this is a convention. Most people say that way, and for simple, it makes sense. Up to the French Revolution, things were this way. After the French Revolution, things changed a lot. You got rid of your kings and queens, you replaced it with a republic, you started a secular state. You had they overthrew the religious ideas. They, killed all the nobles, deprived the church of its. They really, changed society around a lot. Now, many Jewish historians also look at the French Revolution, or maybe the late 1700s, as the beginning of the modern era. That would say the Haskalah, Moses Mendelssohn. And for the first time, we have new ideas challenging, shall we say, the classic Orthodox Judaism. That would be, again, Mendelssohn died 3 or 4 years before the French Revolution. So that would be what we call the Enlightenment. By the way, another big change that defines the modern era is the movement to the right. Not the Haskalah was a movement to the left. The movement to the right is Hasidism. Hasidism is a modern movement. It never existed before the modern era. I know people don't like to think, I don't say don't like, but they don't think of Hasidism as a modern movement because they have that whole way of dress and all the rest of it. Makes it sound like they're old. But everybody knows there's no secret that the Baal Shem Tov lived at the time of George Washington. It's nothing to talk about. Now, but this is not the periodization I'm going to adopt for our course today. For the purposes of this series, and in terms of the history and fate of the institution of Beis, I'm adopting a different periodization, which is known in the historical profession nowhere else, of Azriel Shochet, in his famous book called Im Chiluk Feit Kufot, which is very well known among egghead historians. And he, 1960, he made the argument that let's use it. I'll use terms that'll be easier to understand here. The beginnings of people becoming not from long predate the late 1700s and the French Revolution, the Haskalah, all the rest of it. You already see a Schwachkeit. You already see a weakening slowly across the board in many places in the about 100 years earlier, let's say around 1700. So not like 1770, 1780, but more like 1680 or 1700, that kind of thing. And he quotes from a whole bunch of sources, famous Shalos and Shubas and Droshes and this, that, and the other, to sort of back up. It's a very controversial thesis, and it's a very interesting one if you're in my profession. However, it works as far as basins are concerned. Because as I said before, when did all these Portuguese communities that completely sort of changed the rules as far as communities and basins start? Around, 1600s and early 1700s. That's when the new reality was there. So if you move to this Amsterdam or London or Berlin or one of these places, nobody's giving you malchus, right? And nobody's putting you in a stockade or anything. Now, in Eastern Europe they will, but not already in Central and Western Europe. That's over, okay? There was a famous story of a guy who went to the Vilna Gaon, but that's in Poland, in Vilna, in Italy. And he said something that he took to be not from. Vilna Gaon said, Rashi says this, and the guy said, well, Rashi doesn't give you a pshat, it's just a drasha. And before he knew it, he says, he was in the stocks, like you see in Williamsburg, like that. And they put him in front of the shul, and everybody walked the shul for mincha, spit on him, whatever. And Poland was a different story. If we're talking about Germany, France, England, Holland, those places, that was over, okay? So, again, the Protestant countries allow no Sharia law. There's just the law of England. There's just the law of the Dutch. There's no other laws. So a Jew who doesn't listen to what they tell him in the synagogue, they may refuse to give him an aliyah, they could refuse to perform a wedding or something like that. To use American language, they could kick your kid out of day school, but that's not identical with the kinds of physical punishments that the Talmudic law had in mind long ago. Okay?
No cemetery.
Right. You could do that. That's correct. So welcome to the modern era in Jewish history. Is a radical discontinuity in terms of the autonomous coercive communities. Legally, the Jewish courts, such as there were the Beis, because they had Beis in Amsterdam, London, Bordeaux, could not physically punish. And legally, no Jew had to listen to them. Legally, meaning if I'm living in London, legally I only have to listen to England. You see? As you and I are the case today in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't have to listen to anybody legally. You see? So, which was not the case prior to that. When the Jews had autonomous communities, they legally, by the law of the state, had to listen to the Jewish community, the Beis, all the rest of it. I told you, who was it that administered the executions and the whippings and the maimings and all the rest of it? It wasn't the Jewish community, it was the king's officers. You see? So all that's over when you get to this period. So what tools did they have? Social pressure. Okay, like we just said before, social pressure. So a cherem in the sense of ostracism, if everybody agrees to participate in the shunning, which, as we all know, ostracism can possibly be very tough. Okay? Imagine if you're talking about the golden age of the Sephardim in Amsterdam. Some of us have been there and seen the shul, which is a shadow of what it was in its heyday. And you can see it was packed and super fancy, all the rest of it. And there was a very intensive and interesting social life going on as being a member of the Spanish-Portuguese community synagogue. Now, the synagogue was a happening place, especially on Shabbos, a place they had. Kings and queens and princes used to come and visit them and so forth. It's interesting. And if you are, ostracized, that might do the trick to get you to stop keeping your store open on Saturday. You know what I'm saying? But that's a different thing than hitting somebody, okay? Or they would give them a fine, but then again, you got to be willing to pay. You see? So in other words, if you don't pay, you lose your library privileges, you lose your synagogue privileges, things like that. On the other hand, the guy might be stubborn, son of a God. Isn't this what happened with Disraeli? His father was fined by the synagogue. He said, yeah, I'll show you. He converted all of his kids to Christianity. Very Jewish. To Lahakas you. He converted all of his kids to Christian. But anyway, as I said before, why would anybody agree to submit to the fines, to the asim? For business reasons. One of the reasons you want to be in that show, one of the reasons, and I'm sure very often not the least important reason, is a business, correct? Because I hate to say it, but you know and I know. What are these guys talking about in the back of the synagogue in that picture? They're not talking about the Parsha of the week, okay? They're handling, because all these guys were Dutch Jewish merchants, and, did you hear about the latest ship that came in with calico? Do you hear what the Plony ship got attacked by pirates? And obviously it totally affects your business. So to be cut out of that loop, I think they call it today social orthodoxy. To be cut out of that loop could hurt your, business thing. So that's already a different thing than what you had in the earlier times. For social reason, if he cares to come to shul, have others attend his simchas, to be buried, things like that, if he wants to be part of the community. But a guy might be like Spinoza and say, I don't care. That is who Benedict Spinoza was. He said, this is what I believe to be the truth, and I don't care about the ostracism. Plus, it's also true, in this kind of a situation, if somebody's rich and powerful, some rich guy can defy the community because he'll get all of his supporters behind, But in general, this didn't happen. The adjunta, as they call it, which was the board of directors, ruled with an iron hand, and they tried to flex their power. If there ever was a power struggle, it would not be between the Beis and the board of directors and the adjunta. It would be between a recalcitrant and the adjunta. They might tell some rich guy, you got to stop doing this and this and this. And the guy might argue and defy them for whatever reason. And he might have 24 employees in the synagogue, and they're going to back him. The Beis is a weak noodle. It's a tool of the adjunta. You understand? If the Beis doesn't go along with what they say, they'll fire them. Simple as that. And therefore, in general, I would say in the Portuguese communities, the adjunta was the boss, the Beis was the employee, and the rabbi was definitely not so prestigious. Which is why the poor guy, Menashe ben Israel, was very much like Rodney Dangerfield. He's always complaining about they get no respect. Even though with the Christians he was held in very high regard. He's the guy who persuaded Oliver Cromwell, as you know, to let the Jews back in England, all the rest of it, because he was so learned, all the rest of it. But for the business guys that ran the community in seeing how much you worth, what's he worth? And they at times did fire him and suspend him for this, that, and the other. They made his life miserable. So this is, now by the way, at the same time, if you went to Poland or even many places in Germany, once like that, nobody would insult the Rav. There's a different hierarchy. You get what I'm saying? It's unthinkable. You see? He'll get them fired. So it depends when and where. In the Spanish-Portuguese communities, you can be sure the Choshen Mishpah cases that were decided in the house were decided by laymen. Because after all, he and I, we know the spice trade, and these rabbis don't. And I don't care what the Talmud says. And this guy and I, we understand the fur business or the import-export. And we understand the effect that the recent war in somewhere had on the market, and therefore that's got to affect the contract and all the rest of it. Okay? As I said, the Portuguese Jews even were located sometimes in North Africa where they had exceptional status. So Livorno, Leghorn, where I was at the last trip to Italy, had a very powerful commercial community, all of Spanish Portuguese Jews, all of them. And they had little colonies in other trading areas in North Africa, like Algeria, Tunisia, Tripoli, and places like that. The local Jews were treated like dirt by the Muslims, because they're just the local Jews. These guys, because they brought in so much money, they dressed different, they were considered chashav, and it was unthinkable that somebody from the superior Portuguese Jews would marry a girl from Algeria, from Morocco, Tunisia, and all the rest of it. It's even inter-Sephardic racism, you understand? Now, let's look at the Ashkenazim now in the 1700s as we come to the modern period. The Ashkenazim, of course, for starters, in that part of the world, they were located in France and in Germany. Okay, what I'm pointing to with my pointer. This area, Alsace-Lorraine, and in various parts of Germany, which would include the Austrian Empire, Bohemia, and Hungary, and places like that. Now, the German states, and you understand that that time was a new country called Germany. The reason you have all these colors is this is Prussia, this is, Bavaria, and lots and lots of countries. That map is not even accurate in the sense there are a lot of little countries located in the big blob. So, they were in the process of modernizing and centralizing in the 18th century. It didn't happen overnight, but it went in that direction. The process went on steadily, gradually. Power concentrated, flowing from the nobles and the church to the king. Instead of the king becoming first among equals, the prima inter pares, the king reached a higher madrega. Less and less did the nobles rule arbitrarily on their estates. Less and less were there different sets of law. So if you look at the famous benevolent despots who were famous in the 18th century, Frederick the Great and Catherine the Great and Maria Theresa and people like that, Joseph II, they all had in common what I said. They were creating the modern state in that they're drawing power away from other power holders. So the Jewish community flourished to the degree that it did when there was diffusion of power. Now, you don't know what I mean because we live in America. This idea is unheard of to us. But imagine if the rich people in Maryland had literally the legal right to rule parts of the state. You understand? The legal right. I suppose the Catholic Church had the legal right to rule, Italian neighborhoods or something like that. This was the old Europe for many, many years. Therefore, if the Italians are under the Catholic Church and this was under this one and this one, you can understand the Jews would be under the local Jewish community. But if you suck that power away from all these guys and you say, no, there's one government with one set of laws for everybody, period, then the Jews don't fit into that either. And the Jews have to go along with that program. And the Jewish community as a power structure, including the Beis, has to leave the scene. Okay? The more they centralize, which means power, what does that mean when I say centralized power? That's just a term they use in college. It means the people with the kayak now are the bureaucrats. Used to be this local prince who lived in this neighborhood, he ran the show. Now the king's representative runs the show. We call them bureaucrats, you see? They're the ones making all the decisions. And the bureaucrats, by definition, were always precisely engaged in the project of sucking the power away from others and putting it in their own hands. So the more they discountenance what we call today Sharia law, the more they discountenance the Jewish community as a state within a state. All of a sudden people start using that language. What is going on here? These Jews have power to do this, that, and the other. They can penalize the members of their community. They can exercise force and physical this. What's this, a state within a state? Now, in the Middle Ages, everything was a state within a state, but now it's changing. Each one of these states in Europe that I'm talking about, in its own time and place, limited and eventually canceled the coercive powers of the Jewish Kehillah. This is a process that went on in the 1700s and the 1800s. By the time you get to the middle 1800s, here, in different times and places, that is over. There's no such thing as a Beis Din with power. There's no such thing as the community machers that power. Like I said before, they can rule the bima, you know what I'm saying? They can rule the cemetery, those kind of little ritual things, but they can't rule you. They can't rule your life. The only reason it was gradual, why didn't it happen overnight? Why did the states deprive them? The famous thing of, Groucho Marx said, why don't your brother thinks he's a chicken. How come you don't stop him? He said, because we need the eggs. So here they had the communities, they were using the coercive power to collect the taxes for the state. The state liked that. You see? In other words, the one part they didn't want to get away from the Jewish power was that you guys collectively assess the taxes and deliver to us in cash on January 1st of every year. So they didn't overnight eliminate that kind of state within the state they liked. But eventually they did. Only a historian could chronicle the geographical and chronological variation, but that's not important tonight. I don't have to bore you with that in 1800 this year and 1650 in that year. Who cares? In addition to this external political pressure from the state on the communities and the Beis, there emerged also in the 18th century, 1700s, cultural pressure from the European Enlightenment, which was a movement that was anti-clerical and opposed to religious coercion in principle. Okay? So they weren't opposed to coercion. Matter of fact, all modern dictators come from the Enlightenment. All modern dictatorships come from the Enlightenment. But they didn't like religious coercion. In other words, we want to have the power. And not the church, not the priests, not the galachan, and certainly not the rabbis. So the Enlightenment as a movement, which spread across Europe, there's the French Enlightenment, the English Enlightenment, the German Enlightenment, the Polish Enlightenment, Italian Enlightenment, and so forth. They had certain things in common. They weren't all the same, but they had certain things in common. And one of the things in common was what I told you before. They were offended by religious coercion. Okay? Coercion should be exercised by the state. They had no problem with kings being absolute monarchs and dictators, but they didn't like the church to have that power. Okay? This view was picked up by Moses Mendelssohn in the 1780s. Just before he died, he wrote a book called Jerusalem, in which he makes the case, look at this, an action beneficial to the public does not cease to be beneficial even if it's brought about by coercion. A religious action, in other words, not an action beneficial to the public, but a religious action is only religious to the degree that's performed voluntarily and with proper intent, which is not according to the Talmudic law, okay? And Talmudic, they say you should do Shalol Lishma, and one day you'll reach Lishma, right? So if a person says like this, I don't feel like keeping Shabbos, and don't talk to me anymore. I heard a podcast there myself, he goes, I don't, Tisha B'Av doesn't turn me on anymore. The old idea is like this, too bad. You fast on Tisha B'Av and you keep Shabbos, you see? And maybe one day you'll get around to it, maybe you won't. Too bad. And the Enlightenment says like this, a physical action, as he says in the first phrase, is beneficial to the public regardless of the intention. Which means, if a poor person comes to me and needs help and I give him $100, maybe I did it because I want to get the guy the heck off my back. You understand? It doesn't matter. Why? Now he has food to put on the table. Rabbi Hertzberg always used to say that. You don't need lishma for tzedakah, correct? If you're helping someone in need, the fact you did it is there. But a religious ceremony only has meaning, he argued. It only matters to God if the person does it with a good will. I'm keeping Shabbos because I want to keep Shabbos. I'm putting on tefillin because I want to put on tefillin. This is new ideas now. You and I are used to this today. Although I always have fun. I had fun in the past when I taught classes, either in high school or near Israel. And if you want to have fun, you say like this. I could do it here, but I'm not going to. Fun. You see, if you had a friend today, or if this is a good NCSY discussion group, if you had a friend today, he or she's going to be Michal Shabbos a week. And you have the possibility of locking up in a closet till Shabbos is over and physically preventing being Michal Shabbos, which is a terrible Aveira. Would you do it? And it's always interesting, I won't say it's half and half, but there's always two groups. And some of them say, no, you can't keep Shabbos. You can stop somebody, you do it. And the other one say it's going to be counterproductive, like Moses Mendelssohn. How can you act this way nowadays? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't even have a meaning that you can't say the person who's banging the door in the closet is keeping Shabbos. And we have these fights. So, nevertheless, it's interesting that Moses Mendelssohn, who was a Talmud Chacham, he was a knowledgeable religious Jew and was a philosopher, should make a statement like that within the context of Judaism, because he was saying Judaism does not believe in religious coercion, which was just not true. Okay? It shows you that the climate of public opinion in the beginnings of what we're calling the modern era just didn't feel comfortable with religious coercion. You see, the way they once upon a time felt very comfortable. Now again, I'm talking about Europe, as you know very well. In Saudi Arabia down till today, and Afghanistan down today, they got no problem with religious coercion. You see? But I'm talking about in the West. Okay? It's a part of the European development. And if we go to the next one, there's a famous case in Hamburg in the late 1700s. They had an old-fashioned rabbi, a famous Talmud Chacham, by the way, a cousin of Talmud Shagasari, Tarshish Yukasio. And there was a Jew who wanted to shave. And the Jewish laws were that every Jew has to have a beard. It could be a little beard like Moses Mendelssohn. And the Christian law was the same thing. A rich Jew once complained to Frederick the Great's father, let me get rid of my beard. And he sent him a lot of petitions, and he said, tell Levin that he should leave me and his beard alone. Yeah. But now it's already like 1780, 1790, whatever. And he sanctioned him and so forth. And the guy complained to the Senate of Hamburg. He complained to the state. And the state had a whole debate on it. And they said, listen, if you're Jewish, you got to listen. And they forced them to listen. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. Everybody felt out of it. You understand? Nobody felt good about this. So that's what's going on. These are the trends, as you can see, in what you and I call the West, which is obviously going to affect what's going to happen in a place which by the end of the 1700s is going to be called the United States of America. Right? Now, then we turn to Eastern Europe, which is most of the Jews live there, correct? Eastern Europe is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. No Jews were allowed in Russia ever, in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But there you had millions. As I've told you before in past, in many occasions, this place had the largest Jewish community by far. They're the only ones that had a real baby boom. They went on for centuries, right? Went on for centuries. So they grew to be the largest group of Jews. And just to make it clear, in addition, there were, I would say, 100,000 Jews in the Austrian Empire, which is next door. So between here and here, between Eastern Europe and Eastern Central Europe, you had the largest Jewish population. Now, in Poland, even as late as the 1700s, power was diffused. It was not concentrated by the king. The opposite. The nobles ruled their estates, absolutely. And they permitted the old system to function, the Jewish community, the Beis, the rabbi, the beating up, the whipping, all that stuff, because that's what they did, you see? Although there were complaints, eventually, there developed even a Polish Enlightenment late in the day, which is famously associated with the last king of Poland, Stanislaus, his name was Poniatowski. And even then they started to say, this is not good. Now, mind you, they're very selfish. And so they said, we shouldn't have a state within a state that the Jews have such extensive autonomy, because the Jews did have a lot of autonomy. Remember, they had Vada Barbarossa and things like that. I mean, if you lived in Poland in 1700, middle 1700s, you live in a town, of course, the Paritz, the nobleman, is the boss. And he could shoot anybody, whatever he wants, anytime he feels like it. But under him, you have the local Jewish community, and there they have their board of directors, and they have the Beis, and you don't mess with them. You do not mess with them. But by 1764, even the Poles said we have to start rethinking the whole thing, and they abolished the Vada Barbarossa. They said, we'll take the taxes ourselves directly now. Okay? And if that's happening in Poland, that really shows you that the European ideas are spreading out there. This is one of the reasons the Misnagdim didn't win. Everybody knows that. The Hasidic movement started exactly at this time. It reached a boiling point in 1772. The communal leaders, the boards of directors, almost everywhere at the beginning were against the Hasidim, because they were the establishment, and the Hasidim were challenging the norms. Just to give you one example out of many, they want to switch the Siddur from Nusach Ashkenaz to Nusach Sfarad, which was considered very offensive to the Ashkenazic mentality, very offensive. And if it was the old Poland, they would have suppressed the Hasidim by force. But now they were, so to speak, castrated. They were, stripped of their power by the state. Now, if you're a Chassid, what do you say? You say, well, Hashem did it. You see? Another comes coincidentally. So, what can I tell you? The Vilna Gaon, let's go to the next one. At the very beginning, no, before that. Is there one before that? Yeah. Look at that. The Vilna Gaon, the Hasidim were whipped before the Russians stopped this. The first outbreak of the Misnagdic Hasidic Wars was 1772. And the two places that led the attack against the Hasidim, the real Misnagdim, was in Vilna and in Brody. Vilna is at this end of Poland, and Brody is at that end. To use American terms, Vilna is like Seattle, and Brody is like Miami, roughly speaking. And they had two classes, and they were really offended by the Hasidim, who they thought is a heretical movement and all this stuff. And in Vilna, the Vilna Gaon had a lot of influence, and the Hasidic guys they caught doing these things were dragged out and were publicly whipped, because you could do that. Within a short time, Poland fell apart. The Russians came in and became part of Russia, and Russia said, no more power to the Jewish courts to punish. Now again, if you're a chassid, you say like this, Lubavitcher, you see, God intervened. But this did happen. Now mind you, not that the Hasidim are opposed to coercion, they would use coercion for their purposes, but I'm just saying, in the classic basic kind of sense, they could have suppressed the new Hasidic customs. Wouldn't happen in an early generation when the establishment powers were institutionally strong. Okay? Now, by the time you get to the 1800s and the 19th century, the old system was gone. In other words, across the board, all the European countries, by the time you get to 1800s, abolished the powers of the Jewish community, although they didn't abolish the Jewish community. Okay? They retained the Kehillah in a way that we don't have in America. They retained the Kehillahs as legal entities, but they did deprive them of coercive power. So it's not like America. In Germany, down till today, and some other European countries, down till today, there exists a legal thing called the Jewish community. Part of your taxes go to that. You know that? If you live in Germany, for example, and you fill out your tax form, there's what you call the 2% thing. And the 2% means that if you wish to, your 2% of your taxes can go to the church of your choice. It's called Kirchensteuer. You support the church. So if I'm a Catholic in Bavaria, I just check off the box, I want the 2% to go to the Catholic church. If I'm a Muslim, I say I go to the Muslim thing. What does that mean, you go to the church? The state in Germany and in other countries in England, in Europe, legalize and regulate. They regulate these communities, and the state pays a portion, depending each state, of the religious stuff. So in America, the front people always say like this, we need government support for private schools. We're going crazy on the tuitions, people are being killed in tuitions, and they are being killed on tuitions. The counter argument is, well, we got separation of church and state. In Europe, you don't have that. In Europe, the state, if you had the European system over here, then the federal government would be funding the T80 Beis Yaakov and all these other kind of things, because it would be a matter of politics. And believe me, if they gave away zillions in the food giveaways, then they would give away zillions in the other things as well. I'm not saying that's good, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just trying to tell you that the reality was there, and therefore Jewish communities as legal entities existed and still exist in ways that's not possible in America. But the states did deprive them of coercive power, sort of, not entirely. Let's go to the next one. The famous article, how did Samson Raphael Hirsch end up in Frankfurt? Because he wasn't from there. Frankfurt was a city where it had strong Orthodox and strong Reform. But the Reform were able to win the elections, and therefore they controlled the board of directors. And therefore, the monies and the policies are now run by I'll call them the Federation. The Federation of Frankfurt, which is dominated by Reform Jews. They defunded the Orthodox synagogue. They closed down the mikveh by defunding it. They prohibited people from opening schools. See, because you can't open a school unless you get a license. They won't give you a license. It's Germany. It's not like America, right? And in fact, you couldn't even open a shul if you didn't get a license. So this kind of coercion you had, it's nothing physical, but they can use their administrative powers to deny things and do things and affect things. They closed down the kosher food, which of course led to a powerful reaction. That's where the Yekkis come from. Because Hirsch was brought in as the knight in shining armor to lead the countercharge. In other words, you won't let us build a shul? I'll go to the state and present a shul, and we won't take a penny of the Federation money. We'll raise it all ourselves. And you know something else? While we're doing that, we'll make another JCC, we'll make another Sinai hospital, we'll make another cemetery, we'll make everything, and won't take a penny from you. That's his whole shita. But the regular Kehillas were offended because they said, we're supposed to have this kind of coercive power. So it's funny, Herschel, Orthodox, and he's writing these famous essays, save us from religious coercion. Get it? That's what he always writes. Save us from religious coercion. So he has to use the language of the liberalism, to buttress his own thing. Now, then of course, as you know, there was something called the USA, which didn't have many Jews. And there you had separation of church and state. So obviously there's zero coercion, right? The founding fathers of this country, like Jefferson and Madison and all that, didn't think of the Jews. There were 2,500 Jews in the whole country at the time of George Washington. They had their issues with religious coercion, one Christian sect over another. The different Protestant groups, the Catholic, everybody was scared to death of the Catholics. They wanted to, really emasculate and deprive any religious thing of any power whatsoever. There should just be, you go voluntarily, and you can switch any church you want. And Thomas Jefferson, of course, led the charge on this. I'll tell you again, he wasn't thinking about the Jews, because there weren't any. He was thinking about the Episcopalian Church and its powers in Virginia, which he overthrew with the Virginia Constitution. On his tombstone, it's famous that here lies Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the state of Virginia, which deprived the religious bodies of any power. You see? Now the Jews benefited from that indirectly because this ended up in what we call the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights at the federal level, not the state level, says that you can't mention religion in any law. Congress cannot pass any law involving establishment of a church, which de facto means you can't have a federal law. I say again, a federal law, which says Jew, Christian, Muslim, anything like that. Because it can't be a Jew can do this and a Muslim can't, or anything of that nation. People can do it, people can't do it. So Memela, indirectly, that resulted in the Jews having complete religious freedom. I think we who live in Maryland are aware that that applied at the federal level. The states, for a long, long time, had the power to legislate religiously, and didn't we have a Jew bill here? Which means in 1830, which is quite later than the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence and all that, and the Constitution, only in 1830 did the state of Maryland pass a law giving Jews the right to vote and things of that nature. So at the state level, you can still have religious discrimination. In that environment, the idea of a Beis Din is like weird. Get it? The whole concept that your church, your religious denomination, should have any legal power at all is rather offensive to the American spirit. See? And it's only like if all of us totally agreed to set up a Beis Din or whatever the Catholic equivalent is, and all of us agree to follow its rulings, it's only because we agree, that's the American way. You see? By the way, this actually had the result of intensifying genuine religiosity because there was no coercion. This is the famous observation of Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville. He writes this famous book in the 1830s, the French guy who comes to America. Very famous, very interesting book. And he says, it's funny. In France, you have religious coercion and nobody ever goes to church. In America, there's no religious coercion and the churches are full. It's famous. So he said, you see from here that force is not necessarily the basis. But that's so, of course, we all understand it because we're Americans. But as you can tell from what I've been trying to get across over here, that's so antithetical to the Talmudic way of thinking, the biblical way of thinking, that it's kind of funny. Thus, it's no surprise that in the 19th century, everything fell apart from the point of view from Judaism. There was mass defection, slowly but inexorably, because there was no longer any coercion to keep people from doing so. So it used to be a time that people kept kosher because you had to. Now, nobody has to do anything, so a lot of people don't. Now, it wasn't solely due to the removal of court coercion, Beis Din coercion, although that's an important part of it, but the absence of Beis Din coercion required its replacement by social pressure, like the Hasidism, and that did not happen. In other words, if you're talking about Eastern Europe, it could be that even if legally the community no longer had any formal institutional power because the state took it away, but if you're a chassid living in Belz, you're going to just do what everybody else does. And anyway, you have the social aspect, the charismatic aspect, the life, the holidays, the whole lifestyle, you do it, you see? But as you know, the Litvaks didn't come up with anything like that, right? And so the result is there was mass defection all over the place, and there was a constant hemorrhaging throughout the 1800s, early 1900s. Formerly, you had the small community which supplied the social pressure, but not under urbanization, which shreds the social pressure. Again, I've said this many times, long ago, before the modern era, you didn't have industrial revolution. So for a whole bunch of reasons, you couldn't open a business of manufacturing. You had the guilds, everything had to be done handcraft by a guy, and they had legal power to prevent you from opening a factory. But eventually that changed. And when that changed, you went for pure capitalism, and then anybody can open a factory and manufacture whatever they want. The state now encouraged that, which led to tens of millions of people. You hear what I said? Tens of millions of people over the course of the 1800s doing what? Moving from little towns and villages and the farm side to the cities to get jobs. This created the modern cities called the urbanization. It never existed. How many people were in New York City in 1800? I happen to know the answer. It's 13,000, okay, 14,000. How many people were in New York City in 1900? Like 4 million, 5 million, you see? So this is just one of the great untold stories that they don't usually discuss in history classes. How the heck did they put together something called the modern city in terms of food, toilets, education, public hygiene all across the, how'd they do that? But they did it, right? Because the money was there. Big business wanted it. So from what we're talking about today, it goes like this. If I'm living in a little town, as everybody did, in a shtetl, to use a word you'll be familiar with, or a dorf. So how many Jewish families are there? Let's say 20. Where were you yesterday at Mincha? We didn't see you. Well, I was sick. You can only be sick so often. You get it? How come the butcher said like this? I haven't seen your wife at the butcher shop. Like, what's going on? If you want to get really, the guy was like this. You haven't seen your wife at the mikvah. The mikvah lady said, what's going on? There's no privacy. There are a million novels written about the small town. Now, there's always a plus and there's a minus to living in the small town. They're the same. There's no privacy. So if you have an aged parent and, where should they should live in a small town. Why? The neighbors will know about them. If they don't show up, at the store to buy their daily bread, people come and visit them and things like that. And they do care. Masha Enkin, if you have a large city, I'm standing next to you in a crowd. I don't want to know you. I don't want to shake your hand if I can get away with it. I'm at a ball game. Here's one stranger, another stranger, and for all I know, it's the Boston Strangler and it's Bundy. I don't want to know. Imagine if you're living in an apartment in New York City. Do you really want to know who's in the next building, especially this for that? You don't want to know. So we have what is called the lonely crowd. It's physically large numbers of people, but it's very lonely because there's no community among them. You see? So in that kind of context, what is the most powerful social reinforcer of norms? The small community itself, because lack of privacy. So for century after century, even if somebody wasn't educated, you live in this small village, this is what you do what your parents did, you just go along. There's no room for nonconformity. And the kids go along. And when you grow up, you're going to marry a Jewish guy, and they're going to repeat the process. And if you're Catholic, you're going to marry a Catholic guy and repeat the process. And if you're in the heart of Africa, you're going to do it with your tribe. And if you're in Asia, you're going to do it that way. It's not a Jewish thing. It's a small town thing around the world. And everybody's going to know everything about you, and there are no secrets in small towns. Everybody knows everything in Peyton Place, right? That's how it goes. When you go to the city, you have anonymity. You see, you have anonymity. So all of a sudden, if I'm in town, I always buy kosher food because I got to. Now, I moved to a place called New York. We haven't seen you at the kosher butcher. Oh, I go to another one. Haven't seen you in the show lately. I daven elsewhere. All of a sudden, you have the privacy, you see? So this was a powerful shredder of the social pressure, okay? Plus, the new cities provided something called public schooling, which never existed before. Free public education. So you send your kids to that. It's free. If you're Jewish, you'll even pay for something called high school, unless you live in a country called the United States of America, which alone in the world had free high school. And if you live in a place called New York City, you even get what? You get free college. And the parents will slave away. So you're not going to send them to TA or something like that, Beis Yaakov, you're going to send them to public school. Plus, the whole concept of a Jewish school didn't exist. And therefore, this accounts for the mass defections. Plus, you had a secular Western culture, which is opposed in principle to fundamentalism for a lot of good reasons. In this context, the institution of Beis Din retreated into Orthodox enclaves in the West, which were small. At best, as I can tell, Choshen Mishpat fell into desuetude. In the religious communities over there, Beis Din is supervising hechshers and things like that. A mikveh, if there's one. There's no such thing as you have to go to this court to settle something. Everybody goes to regular court. What's wrong with the American courts? What's wrong with the English courts? What's wrong with the French courts? I'm serious, It's a system, it runs. You like that, okay? Now, this is what happened. Now, as best I can tell, Choshen Mishpat fell into desuetude, and the Beis Din assumed more and more role as supervisors of rituals and ceremonies. Conversions, kashrus, erev, chametz, mikvah, divorce. Of course, they always had their functions in the past, but that's not where their power lay. But now they had to retreat in the face of modernity into these areas. The Beis Din was institutionally incapable of ignoring the increasing violation of the Jewish law on the part of the majority. Yet they realized hectoring didn't work. It only angered the hectored. So, again, if you go back so and so many years in this country, what are you going to say? We all know the famous story. Rabbi, don't talk about Shabbos. Don't talk about kashrus. Talk about Judaism. What does that mean? Because nobody keeps anything. So if you have a community and everybody's working on Shabbos, so what exactly the Beis Din supposed to do? You see? And they weren't that stupid to simply say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. It looks ridiculous. So the sociology completely transformed and left the old models, the Talmudic ideas, all the rest of it, just out there, completely irrelevant. Okay? In those places where the Kehillah remained officially Orthodox, and there were some places like that in Europe, where the community remained in the hands of the Orthodox, the Beis Din had to not comment on what the non-observant were doing, lest it make matters worse. That's the famous story of Chassam Sofer, who was a very religious guy, but when he became the rabbi in Pressburg, he was given a letter by 50 families who said like this, listen, you leave us alone, we won't make any trouble for you. You make trouble for us, we'll make trouble for you. You see? And he told his guys, just leave these guys alone. Okay? And his son did the same thing. The third one started to make trouble, and they formed a separate reform community. You understand? That's the reality now, you see? Now, where there was a reform community, by the way, the Beis Din had to tread carefully, meaning the Orthodox Beis Din had to tread carefully, because otherwise, if we go too hard on this guy, he'll join the reform. This was the fate of David C. Hoffman in Germany, where half of his response are always like, I don't want to allow that, but otherwise the guy will go reform. He's the one who gave the famous ruling, which is controversial, that you can do a conversion even if the person doesn't accept the mitzvahs. Oh, I said that wrong. Even if they're not shomer mitzvahs, they accept the mitzvahs, they're not shomer mitzvahs. Right? So you see, what kind of a conversion is the person, Mechal Shabbos, all the rest of them? Well, he said, well, then they'll just go reform or something like that. This is always quoted in the literature. Now, he was a very firm guy, but he lived in Berlin in 1900, 1890, you see? And so the sociology is what it is. So it was a new day. It was a new day. Now, it wasn't the same everywhere. Where you had what I would call a thick frum population, those areas in Eastern Hungary and Eastern Europe, where there was just a large presence of religious Jews, the Kehillah still functioned, and the Beis Din still adjudicated, but only if the litigants felt pressure to obey. Otherwise, they went to the state courts. So we were talking about Galicia before that. There are places in Galicia where very heavy, let's say, for example, Hasidic presence or traditionalist presence, and there, you might have problems, but as time went on, people said, I don't have to listen to this, and if I have any problems in business, whatever, I'll go to the Austrian courts. Heck with it. You see, and what could you do to them? The state started to really bear down, and they were not going to let the Jews have any coercive power. Otherwise, how would we explain the famous story of the Tsar, Nicholas I, when he chased the Rishon Rebbe, right? Where is Westing here? These Rishon. Remember, we did this long ago. They killed a Moser. It was one or two guys. Let's put it this way. They were found at the bottom of a river with some chains around their legs. There were like two Moserim. And this was in the 1830s in Poland, which was part of the Russian Empire at that time. And believe me, the local cops were on the take because no file was open. They just said it was a suicide. You get it? He must have run into a hardware store, got entrapped, tumbled over and fell down. Okay? For whatever reason, the Tsar of Russia made his business to prioritize this case. And he made a big taram, which he could do. He's the absolute dictator. And he was convinced that the Rishon Rebbe gave the order, which was true. And the Rishon Rebbe was rich and powerful, so he lawyered the whole thing as long as he could. You know, he moved it through the judicial system. But eventually he had to flee into Austria, into Sadager. The point's like this. Nobody's killing the Muslim. This is Russia. This is I, the Tsar. I have the power. It's a modern state. Nobody can take the law in their own hands. Right? Now, if you ask me, is this the only time any Muslim was killed in the Tsar's empire? It's not the only time, but you see, if they want to make a high-profile situation out of it, they could. Because he came very close to being sent to Siberia, to play with the polar bears. I'll tell you right now. He came this close. He says, I'll send you to Siberia, and I'll even give you a minion so you won't have any religious problems, and that's where you'll stay for the rest of your life. That's why he ran away. So it was a spotty situation in Poland and Russia and Hungary, places like that. And in Hasidic territory, it's very interesting. It wasn't the local board of directors had the authorities, but the Rebbe. So some place belonged to Sanz, or some place belonged to Bells, or to Rishon, or something like that. It's a new charisma. Yes, we live in a small town, and let's say everybody in the town is from a small town. And there is a shul and a kehillah with a board of directors and a Beis Din, but they ain't calling the shots. Who decided who should be in the board of directors? The Belzer Rebbe, or the Sons of Rebbe, or this guy, that guy. That's what they are. They swear allegiance to somebody, you see? The Vishnitzer Rebbe. And they tell, he'll say who should be on the Beis Din. And I'm not saying he's going to tell the Beis Din what to do, but you can strongly hint, let's put it that way. So the classic model of the Kehillah with its Beis Din was everywhere undergoing profound transformations. That's my point, right? Now, new forms of authority were emerging to provide the charisma in the wake of the bankruptcy of the local institutional authority, to put it in formal English. In general, by the time you get to the 1800s, rabbinical training in yeshivas and seminaries did not emphasize Choshen Mishpat. There was a time where Choshen Mishpat, which is financial laws, was more or less like the central to the curriculum, because all these young guys are thinking one day I'll be a dayan or something like that, and I'll be able to know how to rule in these things. Today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, what the guy got to know that for? You got to know your Orach Chaim, your halachas about Shabbos and Tisha B'Av. You got to know your Yeridea. What do you have to know about Malva and Lova for? You see? The average rabbi in regular situation, it doesn't pop up. You see? These are all new things. They started in the 1800s. The emphasis on the ritualistic, things like that. You got to know Hilchas Taras Mishpacha and Kashrus and all that kind of stuff. Not the financial business, because the people are going to take it to course. That reflects the new reality. And so the modern rabbi had to know that. Of course, the modern rabbi now, for the first time, has to learn homiletics. Because once upon a time, somebody's a big rabbi who's not expected to give speeches. If you happen to get a lucky situation where you can do both, but most of these rabbis couldn't speak to save their life, that wasn't part of the job description. The job description to preside over the halachic Beis Din and make sure everything's done according to Hoyle. And fancy speeches you leave to a Maggid or somebody like that, And whereas, as well as I do, in the modern Orthodox synagogue, I would say even ultra-Orthodox synagogue, speaking is very important. Right? It's very important. So the 19th century went into the 20th century. The Beis Din as an institution shrank into unimportance within the Orthodox world as a vital factor. That Beis Din is not what kept people from. Okay? The Beis Din possessed, as an institution, I'm saying, The Beis possessed no charisma, and in the modern world, it's all about charisma. Like I said before, it's a free country, America or England or elsewhere. If you want to be from, you have to be attracted to it. You need some kind of charismatic situation or personality that says, I want to be a Shomer Shabbos. I want to join this group. I want to do that. Without the I want to, I never heard of anybody who said, I'm doing this because the Beis in Baltimore said I got to do it. The Beis in New York or somewhere else to do it. It's the other way around. I'm listening to the Beis if I do because the rabbi that I respect or the charismatic authority says I should. It's flipped, you see? Now, so therefore, as you and I know, because we're all born in the 20th century, that the vital institutions that emerged within Orthodoxy was not the Beis, it was the rabbinate, the yeshiva and the yeshiva heads, the Rosh Yeshivas, Gedolim without formal roles, charismatic Gedol. What was the job of these gentlemen? What kind of job did the Chavetz Chaim have, the Chazon Ish, or Chaim Kanievsky to be exact? Were they rabbis of synagogues? Were they Rosh Yeshivas, heads of schools? Listen, were they Dayanim on a Beis Din? None of the above. Their job was a gadol. And they were. So there's a charisma, you see? There's a charisma because they had tremendous authority and are still looked up to the day. You're also on They had no title, no job description. So it's very interesting. You see the necessity of charisma versus the institutional authority that used to be in the Beis. Big Hasidic rabbis, of course, right? Big Hasidic rabbis. I'll just name the Lubavitch Rebbe, Satmar Rebbe. In terms of charisma for their followers, none of these involved the Kehillah. None of these involved formal structures, right? They involved a person. In fact, the Kehillah itself underwent interesting changes in the 19th century. In Central Europe, which in the 19th century meant Austria, Hungary, Galicia, and so forth, there were 2 million Jews. There evolved, especially in Hungary and Germany, what is usually called the Hungarian model, which means that there were 2 distinct types of Judaism. Therefore, 2 distinct types of religious denominations of Judaism that had to either be accommodated within one Kehillah or they broke into 2 Kehillahs. One is called the Neolog or Reform or Liberal Kehillah, which was the most. So if you went to Germany, for example, I'll just give you an example. Let's say you went, for example, to Berlin. There was an official Jewish community. Berlin had close to 200,000 Jews. Very well organized. Very well organized. The official community was run by the Reform, or the conservatives, let's say, and conformed to those models. Very much as is the case in the United States of America, where the federations are not from, you see? But they're federations, and they do all kind of stuff. That's one model. And then there was, and incidentally, all the groups were constituent within that community. And then you have the separatist community, like Hirsch did in Frankfurt. Of course, Hirsch could afford to do it. The president of his synagogue was a guy named Rothschild, so he couldn't get away with that. But there were, of course, separate communities in Germany here and there. But in many places, this was not an option. For example, in Vienna and other places, it was prohibited by law to form your own separate community. The Orthodox and Reform and whoever has to all cooperate with each other by Austrian law. Okay? Therefore, you have the third model, which is called the status quo, or the Einheitsgemeinde, in which the Frum and the not Frum are, together in a single group. They vote for the federation stuff. Maybe they dicker and argue there. You can be sure that in those communities, the religious Jews got the short end of the stick. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. And that's it. Now, in Eastern Europe, things were different. In Eastern Europe, everything was a combined community. But you didn't have different religious denominations of Judaism. You had Judaism and the secular. So therefore, the attitude of the secular was, I don't keep Shabbos, I don't keep kosher, but I understand that there are those who do. So you frummies, you run the kashrus, and we'll pay for a couple of what you and I would call avada kashrus. They don't do that. Burial is usually a Jewish religious type thing. Now, me, myself, and other guys, I could be creative. What the heck? I don't care. And maybe they were. But I understand the community would say, we're secular, but I know a lot of people aren't. My parents, my grandparents aren't. And so we'll fund, to some degree, what you and I would call a Chevra Kadisha. You see, that kind of way of doing things. because they're atheists even. So as we know, the way Eastern Europe developed, you could have socialists, cultural Zionists, alternative Judaisms. This is actually the model for Israel. That's the model they picked up in Israel, the Knesset. You have secular, you have Jewish. Only now is it being challenged because the Reform want to be acknowledged as a form of Judaism. And you see the Reform are going crazy over that. You see? They're breaking up bar mitzvahs at the Kotel, and things like that. It's really freaking them. They said, if we have a community like we've had for 150 years now, in which there's a secular and then there's a religious, and we are the only legitimate form of the religious, okay. But if you're going to start to say there are different forms of being religious, they're going back to Samson Raphael Hirsch. Then, that's like ballistic, you see? So, in Central Europe, as I said before, the law required that you had to be in the same kahila. Somebody like Samson Raphael Hirsch in Hungary, the South Sovereignty, said it's against the din to even be in the same federation, same kahila with these people. There's a famous story. This guy was a Reform rabbi, a conservative rabbi, Chief Rabbi of Vienna, Moritz Gudemann. Very famous historian, I might say. And this is Breuer. Now, Breuer was the son-in-law, Solomon Breuer. He's the son-in-law of Samson Raphael Hirsch. When Hirsch died, it was a big fight. Who should be his successor? I won't give you all the Lashon Hara. He won, but it was a bitter fight. Therefore, the losers were very bitter about it. After a year or two, he felt very uncomfortable. He said, I want to get out of here. He was offered a nice job in Vienna, what they call the Schiff Shul. He had a very large shul, bigger than the one in Frankfurt, and, he could rule the roost. But he came there and he found that you have to be in the same board of directors with this guy. Right? In fact, he took him, he said, Herr colleague, dear colleague, follow me. I'll show you where the Schlachtheis is. I'll show you where the mikveh is, all the rest of it. He was so turned off from that. They said, I'd rather go back to Frankfurt and suffer. And so he remained there for the rest of his life. See? Because the laws in Frankfurt allowed for separate, and the laws in Vienna didn't. It depended. Mind you, there was a Beis Din in Vienna. Vienna had over 200,000 Jews. But the Beis Din is going to combine both types of rabbis. That was unthinkable for him. You understand? How can this guy be in a Beth Din? And was profoundly offensive. Anyway, but on the other hand, there were many Jews in Frankfurt who didn't agree with Hirsch. And they set up a separate Orthodox synagogue in Frankfurt, which was part of the Federation. And this was the rabbi, Marcus Horowitz, a well-known person back in the day. And the Hirschians, to this day, spit when you mention his name and things like that. Because how could you betray the cause and have a shul or an Orthodox guild? And by the way, he said, I'll join, but, you got to give me control of the kashrus. They said, no problem. I have to have my own TA, no problem. Because they would do anything to stick it to Hirsch. You get it? So this is the Jewish politics of yesterday. He even had a yeshiva. Was bankrolled by the Federation just to stick it to Breuer's yeshiva. So this is how life was done. So my point is like this. Here I am living in Frankfurt. I got two Beis Dins. And in the proverbial Robinson Crusoe story, this is a Beis Din I listen to. This one, I would never even step foot in there. You get it? And this one has a hechsher and this one has a hechsher, really, 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 both hechshers were fine. I would never eat at this butcher shop. God forbid. You understand? Because it has so-and-so hechsher. I can tell you a story. My sister, very religious in Israel, she, without naming names, many, many, many years ago, they had a couple that came, and let's just say they were from Meir Sharm. This is true. And at that time, and my sister's very religious, so notice she goes for the best hechsher, which means you actually have to keep on top of what's going on all the time. Is that right? You know how it really works in the world of kashrus? It's not this, and this. If you really, really care, you got to find out what's the story with this Schlachtai situation these days, and has things changed over here? And that's how it really goes. When I was a kid, I remember they didn't have, on the candies, they didn't have all the hechshers, so we always say, what's the latest rumor, is this kosher this week, or not kosher, or a vegetable shortening, whatever. So the point is, it's at Bells. At that time, apparently Bells was the best hechsher. When this lady who was her guest, and they're both all super from, found out, I'll never forget it, She said, this wasn't from the Ada, this from Belgium. She threw up. You see? She threw up. I'm trying to tell you, this is the kind of attitude is the wrong Beis Din. Now, you know and I know, what does the Beis Din of the Ada Chareidis look like? What does the Beis Din of Bells look like? They're both pretty religious. You see? No, that's a Baltimorean speaking. And it's really serious. You have cats you just don't understand. You see? So this itself is a new model. Because once upon a time in the Kehillas of old, there's a Kehillah and a Beis Din. And that's it. When Prague is under the Novi Yehuda, whoever, there's a Kehillah and a Beis Din. When Krakow was under the Ramah, there's a Kehillah and a Beis Din. When the Rambam was in Egypt and Cairo, there's a Kehillah and a Beis Din. That's how it goes. You know what I'm saying? Again, I remember reading a book by Cyrus Adler, who was one of the early founders of the conservative Jews in this country, but he himself was observant. And he said when he was a young man, he visited the Turkish Empire, and he was in Istanbul, and he aspired to be Spanish Portuguese, you know. And there was a parade going on in the Jewish neighborhood. What's a parade? They closed down the Beis Din, which at that time happened, Istanbul. They closed down a restaurant. Okay, the guy had to come and eat humble pie. He had to apologize and do whatever they told him to do. And then they gave him the hechsher back. But it's not enough to say the hechsher back, because it was unthinkable in that world where there's one kill and one Beis Din, they should have like you have in America. I give it a hechsher, but I myself would never eat there. How many times have we heard that? I give it a hechsher, I wouldn't eat there. And so in that world, the old world, if he got the hechsher back, there's a public parade. They go to his restaurant, which had been sealed by the Beis Din. You can't go. And they broke the seal with the Dayanim doing it, and then he served them a public meal in front of everybody. You get it? They sit down, and he like a lunch or dinner, whatever it is, and now you've seen. So this is the old versus the new, as it were. As for Western Europe, sometimes you had a strange institution develop, which is a Beis Din or a Beis Din, as they call it, but within the context of a peculiar type of orthodoxy. I only have time for 1 or 2 examples tonight, but they're cute. Take, for example, France. Under Napoleon, they set up a French Kehillah, national level, called the Consistoire, the consistory, which is a Protestant term. So they said all the Jewish communities have to follow the consistory system, and they actually gave them coercive power, but only coercion to go to the left, not to the right, okay? And they used it. In England, the government didn't do that. The government didn't set up a national Beis Din in order to push them to the left. The Jews themselves in England solicited from Parliament the legal power to set up a Beis Din and a rabbinate, United Synagogue as they call it, in 1840, and therefore their Beis Din should have legal power to issue Jewish marriages and Jewish divorces and some other things by law, because they don't have separation of church and state. And so the result is they developed something called the Chief Rabbi, and Chief Rabbi had a Beis Din, okay? So in England, it was father, son, and the next guy. On the left is Nathan Marcus Adler, then his son Herman Adler. These are the famous chief rabbis of yesteryear. And this is Hertz from the Hertz Chumash, right? Hertz Sitter. Now he just Herman Hertz. And that's 100 years, from 1840s to the 1940s. And by the way, they were all frum guys. They were very westernized. They all went to college and all that kind of stuff. But they were completely Orthodox. They hated the Reform. And the Reform were stuck because Parliament had given power to this group. And they wouldn't give the Reform any rights or power to conduct marriages or things like this. It was a whole mess, okay? This is the British politics of the 18th century, of the 19th century. By the way, I cannot forbear. I always hear the Hertz Chumash Hertz Sitter. I found online a ceremony where Hertz is giving like a bracha at the World War I Memorial in 1933 in London when all the ex-Jewish servicemen come by. And I cut out most of it, but listen to this. This is cool. You know, the Memorial Day, Armistice Day. These are all Jews. That's Hertz.
when the children of men understand that they have one Father, that one God created us all, and spread thy tabernacle of peace over all the dwellers on earth. Amen.
Yeah, if you notice, he has a New York accent. That was interesting to me. Now, England, it's what you made of it. To emerge the semi-legal role of the chief rabbi, you can't force anything by it, but you had a lot of power and influence because the richy riches were the board of directors, and they chose to, Rothschild and Lord Swathling, these guys, and they chose to back the chief rabbi, who was smart enough not to rock the boat. You understand? Notice he would never say like this, "Hey Rothschild, what did you do Shabbos morning?" You ask that question. But the chief rabbi had a supremacy in terms of doctrine and practice in the United Synagogue Charters. And Hertz used that power to block the powerful richy riches from wanting to change it from Orthodox to conservative. They hated him, Robert Whaley Cohn and all that, because he said, I guess it's in the charter that the chief rabbi is the final authority in Judaism, and nothing you can do about it. And you can't fire a rabbi. That was considered too much of a scandal. And so that's what's interesting in British history. They kept out the reform, in other words. Let's put it this way. But the Beis Din cannot coerce, you see? And then, in the late 1800s, 200,000 Russian Jews moved to London and those places, and they said, what is this chief rabbi junk, you know? What's all that? What's a Beis Din, you see? And the result was that the rich Jews, they even called the cousinhood because they're all related. They said, we better, let's put it this way, we want to retain, in the eyes of the Christians, the notion that we're the final and highest authority in Judaism. And we're British too. But these Eastern European Jews, if we have a Beis Din that looks like a joke to them, then they'll just create their own, and they consider that to be a scandalous situation. So they have no choice but to get some serious Talmidei Chachamim to give the London Beis Din some punch, so it'll have to command the respect of the masses. And therefore, you see over here that they started with Dayan Hillman, who was a Talmud Muvak of Chaim Ozer Grzinski. Notice, they have one guy on there who's a big Talmud Chacham. For those who know Sfarim, he has that thing which every page in Shasa, or Hayashar, which is very good. If you go to the next one, this is the London Beis Din. There's Dayan Hillman, and there's these other Dayanim, and that's Hertz. Okay? So the chief rabbi sits over there. Now, they didn't deal with Choshen Mishpah cases. They even said, take that to the court. And they don't do it, but they deal with marriage and divorce and kashrus and all that kind of stuff. Okay? So it's just kind of interesting. And you really end up, as I said before, with what I call mamish strange bedfellows. Let's go to the next one. He was the leader trying to push them into reform and conservative. But he said, it's Robert Whaley Cohn. And he was a weirdo, He was an oil genius, and he saved England in terms of oil in World War I. He was the head of Shell Oil. But on the other hand, he thought, the Frumkeit is too ridiculous. And yet, he liked the Duchen because he was a Kohen. So, so he would drive in 50 miles from his country estate on Yontif, just to be with Duchen. And he said like this, the Beis Din of London needs a big gun so that the Frummies won't be able to say it's not real, because then they'll delegitimate people like that. So he brought in Diana Abramsky, who was like super from Abramsky said, I guess I only take the job if you give up trade rings. It used to be porging, as they call it. You used to sell the meat under the old regime. You devein, which is very difficult to do, and it's very easy to mess up. Therefore, a lot of that meat wasn't really kosher. And there was a whole fight back and forth, you see. Now, I'll end tonight with a last story from the London Beis Din. Let's go to the next one. Diane Grunfeld, who's the translator of Hirsch's stuff. In the 30s, all this stuff happened in the early 20th century. In the 30s, Hitler came to power, and all these German Jews ran away to England. And one of them was this guy Grunfeld, who wasn't a rabbi exactly, but he had learned privately, and he knew a lot. He learned with a rabbi in Germany, and he was a lawyer, right? He came to England, but he doesn't speak the language. And so he went to see Rabbi Hertz, and he said, I'll try to get you a job. He's a nice guy. And so the first place he sent him to was like I don't know, they had a mixed choir or something like that. That lasted about one day. And he went to her and said, what did you send me to? He said, listen, you got to learn how to get along in England. You know, because the United Synagogue has, from right to left, all kind of synagogues. He said, no way. He said, I'll try to send you to another place. And in the other place, they had a wedding, and this is in the 1930s, so the ladies all came in, décolleté, shall we say. And he freaked out, and he pulled out the napkin, what do you call it, on the table, the tablecloth, to wrap around the lady, whatever. So that was a flop. So Hertz said to him like this, he said, listen, I'm trying to get you a job and put bread on the table, and you keep sabotaging, I'm trying to help you, and you're killing it. He said, I don't care, even if my family starves, I'd rather we all starve to death than do something against the din. He said, in that case, I'll offer you a job on the Beis din. I've been looking for an honest man for a long time. And he was. So you have all kind of crazy situations with Beis din stories when it comes to the 20th century because the circumstances had changed so radically. That's all. And next time we'll wrap this up with the postmodern era or the other part of the 20th century. With that, I wish you a good night. Yeah, now they're going to have a menu from Ira in the other room.